Week 4 of college football got off to a strong start when Florida State and Clemson faced off, and it was a game in which many expected Florida State to take care of business, but expected Clemson to put up a fight. And we saw exactly that. Clemson played really well in the first half, even put Florida State in a 17-7 deficit. Now, obviously, they knew that they could not hold that for too long, but they still played well enough to be able to compete in this game, push it to overtime, and then ultimately they did lose to the Seminoles. I think that this was a very entertaining game, a back and forth game that provided us with a lot of good plays, a lot of things to talk about, some concerns for both teams, and some good things to talk about as well. We'll talk about the resiliency of Florida State first off, down 17-7. Big reason why this is important is because you have to go back to Mike Norvell's Memphis days. Because specifically in 2018, you look at those two games against UCF, his teams had a tendency to be able to not come back in the second half or have weak second halves. And that was my biggest concern heading towards halftime. I think that we saw a Florida State team that was struggling, even when you look at the passing attack. Jordan Travis did not have much of a window to throw to on a bunch of plays, and his receivers couldn't come down with passes because there was a small window, and he either didn't hit it or Clemson just knocked the ball away. So this was a team that was struggling to move the ball at times, and normally you'd be concerned about what the second half would look like for that kind of a team, especially under Mike Norvell. But they found a way to get a score late in the first half to make it 17-14. And from there, they've really put on the burners there. I think they were able to figure some things out, and they still needed some help from the defensive side of the ball as well. But Keon Coleman came in clutch when they needed him, had two touchdowns that were pretty phenomenal to watch, especially specifically the go-ahead touchdown in overtime. I think when you have a talent like Keon Coleman, you expect him to do some special things, and he did exactly that. You look at the two touchdowns he caught, the one in overtime required him to go up and over his defender, come down with it, strong at the catch point, and he did exactly that. 86 yards and two touchdowns. He was a big reason why Florida State was able to win that game. Another guy is Jordan Travis. I think that you're looking at a quarterback with Heisman potential, and he's a big reason why they were able to be so calm when things weren't going right and were able to bounce back. It is Jordan Travis. He's such a good leader. Mike Norvell even said it in the post game interview. He said that Jordan Travis is so calm and poised in the moment, and that's what makes him so good at what he does. He is someone who can lead his team into a tough situation and get them out of it. Now you have to tip your cap to Clemson. They did a lot of good things. I think that Cade Klubnik looked really good at times, but I think the defense is really what we saw. I think take the biggest step and show us that they are still a tough group to beat. They held Florida State to just 22 yards rushing. That's something that you have to hang your hat on. It's kind of tough when Clemson's 2-2. I think it's tough to find the positives right now as you're at a 2-2 start, something you haven't had in a long time. But this is still a Clemson team that is very good. They're very competitive with Florida State, and they could have won this game. There isn't a scenario where they couldn't. They definitely were in it, and the defense played a big role. And I think the big thing was they were creating pressure. They sent a lot of unique blitzes that Florida State didn't appear ready for. Florida State was also missing a couple offensive linemen, so that kind of added to it. But this was a defense that was giving them everything they could and then some. I think the DBs played really well. Nate Wiggins' injury is something to keep an eye on, but I think that this secondary gave Florida State's receivers, specifically Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, plenty of trouble. There weren't a ton of instances where you saw Florida State be wide open. You didn't see Wilson and Coleman running downfield wide open. They had to earn everything that they got, and that's something that you can really keep an eye on for the future. I'm very interested to see how Clemson looks moving forward. And it's tough when you lose to a talent like Jordan Travis, but that's how good he is. Now you could make an argument, kind of had a Heisman moment in overtime, maybe, but the stats don't really jump out at you. So you could kind of hold off on that. I think you'll see other potential moments that really stand out. But 289 yards, three total touchdowns. I think his leadership is really what stood out to me. His ability to lead his team even when they were down, and it seemed like things weren't going right. he was able to get them back on track and get them to where they needed to be. And like I said, 289 yards passing, two touchdowns as well, and then he had a touchdown on the ground. Cade Klubnik, 283 yards and one touchdown. I think that yes, there are still things for both sides to figure out. I think that separation for both teams was an issue, and that's not a new issue for Clemson. So that's definitely an issue that you want to have figured out or want to address at some point. I think obviously the biggest thing that people talked about is when you look at Keon Coleman, the transfer portal is going to come up with Clemson every single time people talk about them, and it's easy to see why. You have to find a way to add talent. You have to find a way to create more depth. Yes, Clemson yes, Clemson was in this game. They were able to compete with Florida State, but you have to wonder, had they utilized the transfer portal for certain positions where they need help, you'd like to think that they'd win this game if they were able to do that because Florida State's transfers made an impact. And Keon Coleman was just one of those guys that did it. So you have to think that maybe Dabo Sweeney after this year looks at the transfer portal differently. Maybe it gives them an edge. It's not that you're admitting that all of your players aren't good. It's that there's certain positions that you're going to need some depth pieces at. Maybe you do need a star, and you can find that in the transfer portal, but you do at least need to utilize the resources that are given to you and find a way to do that. Performance that flew under the radar was Kalen DeLoach. His forced fumble and then recovering that fumble, returning for a touchdown was a huge momentum swing for Florida State. His ability to return that all the way back for a touchdown basically turn the momentum. Clemson was on its way to putting up points on the scoreboard, and Deloach comes in with a big hit, a miscommunication on Clemson's side for blocking him, and he takes it back for a touchdown. So that was a huge play for Florida State. A performance that flew under the radar is Will Shipley. I think Will Shipley is one of the best running backs in college football and probably isn't going to get the recognition he deserves this year, but he proved that he's a really tough running back, a good running back in terms of creating space for himself, and he's an above average pass catcher too. So you add that element into that offense, it makes him a very exciting player to watch. Someone who can, like I said, make a huge impact in both the running game and the passing game. It's just a matter of getting him the football, which I think Clemson did a good job of doing today. It's just that we need to see it more consistently. We also need to see the wide receivers step up. We simply cannot have the same issues over and over and over again and expect different results. And part of that is finding guys that will work via recruiting, but you again also have to utilize the transfer portal. That's probably going to be the biggest thing that we take away from this year is if Clemson is able to utilize the transfer portal a little bit more, then maybe you're looking at better results going forward. Florida State still is undefeated. Clemson finds themselves with two losses. I think both teams will still be tough to beat. Florida State has the toughest part of their schedule over with. That does not mean that they are done with some of the tests. When you look at teams like Duke, when you look at North Carolina, there are still some teams that could get you into trouble that can present losses and loss opportunities. So you definitely have to regroup, refocus, figure out what went wrong, how to fix that, and just be fortunate that you're still undefeated.